Welcome and thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Kathleen Rourke from Candlewick Press, and I'm delighted to introduce the 8th and final episode of the first season of the Black Creators series, a collaboration between the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project and Candlewick Press, hosted by Sonja Cherry-Paul, Director of Diversity and Equity at Teachers College Reading and Writing Project. Tonight, we have the pleasure of welcoming not one, but two authors, Victoria Bond and T.R. Simon. Zora and Me, the first title in the Zora and Me trilogy, was co-written by the two and was honored with the Coretta Scott King John Steptoe Award for New Talent, and was the first project not authored by Zora Neale Hurston herself ever to be endorsed by the Zora Neale Hurston Trust. Books 2 and 3, Zora and Me, The Cursed Ground, written by T.R. Simon, and Zora and Me, The Summoner, written by Victoria Bond, both received multiple starred reviews and continue and complete the fictionalized childhood story of literary genius Zora Neale Hurston. Suspenseful, absorbing, powerful, unflinching, extraordinary, and rich are just some of the ways reviewers and Hurston's own niece describe the writing and execution of this stunning sequence. Sonja, Victoria, and TR will be able to reply to comments during the presentation, so we invite you to use the comments section to ask questions. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the conversation.
Hi, Vicki. Hi, TR. Thanks so much for joining us on the Black Creator series.
Oh, Sonja, thank you for having us.
Yes, we feel deeply honored to be with you.
Oh, thank you so much. So today is part of the centennial of the Tulsa Race Massacre. And we know that that was a terror-filled 2-day destruction of the town of Greenwood at the hands of white supremacists. And I thought, since we are here together on part of this centennial, we could talk a little bit about that. Did you learn about the Tulsa Massacre in your K-12 schooling? And if so, how and by whom?
Absolutely not. I did not learn about it in school. And in fact, it was something that I learned about many years ago now when Tanya and I started working on the series, when I started doing, very rudimentary research on Black communities and the history of Black settlements.
And I absolutely didn't learn about it until I was an adult. And I think the thing that I'm still understanding about it and the profundity of its erasure from our history is that there's a consistent attack on Black brilliance, Black genius, and Black achievement. And I think that that was part of what was so shocking to both of us as we learned more about it, is that it is always our excellence that is the most violently punished.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, I didn't learn about it either until I was adult, but TR, as I hear you talking about our Black excellence being violently punished, I'm gonna ask it as a question, but certainly, I noticed some similarities between Greenwood and also Eatonville, Florida, the town that is the setting of your novels in terms of the resilience, the genius of Black communities, and also the ways that they've tried to resist mob violence and these kinds of consistent attacks on our brilliance. Would you say there are some similarities in that sense between the two towns?
I would say it was always on my mind that Eatonville, as a particular kind of incubator of Black excellence, and as this self-determining town in the South, that it was always at risk. And I think that, as we imagined Zora, we imagined her having to try to triumph under those conditions of risk, like that there was always this threat from the outside that was looming over the town, even as it was unspoken, even as she was protected within the town. There was no way to escape that as a Black girl, as a brilliant Black girl, at some point she would have to encounter this external mechanism that was not going to be easy to navigate in terms of making her brilliance known.
Right. You know, I think another thing, or really a dovetailing, is that a place like Eatonville, a place like Greenwood in Oklahoma, these places were havens and they were beacons, but they were also targets, as the Greenwood story clearly demonstrates. And I think that that was at the seed of each of the mysteries in our novels, was kind of exploring how the target factor, how Black excellence and Black brilliance is a target, is really the source of white supremacist violence, really the motivator of it.
And Black autonomy.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Which that makes possible Black autonomy.
Mm-hmm. And as authors of historical fiction, you both have clearly researched and read and learned about history, specifically history of Black people. And as we've been saying, you know, the United States suffers from historical amnesia when it comes to racism. We know that the particular history of the Tulsa Race Massacre and the knowledge about Zora Neale Hurston and Eatonville has been erased from textbooks and teachings in classrooms and schools. What is involved truly in the work of remembering? And I'm wondering, how can books like yours help readers to deeply understand that remembering is active, critical, conscious work? What are your thoughts about that?
It's funny because a friend of mine was telling me the other day, she's like, oh, you always want to go on a plantation tour. I don't want to go on a plantation tour. You know, it's the last thing I want to do. Why are you so obsessed with slavery? And I thought it was a funny question in a sense, because I can't not be obsessed with it, because remembering, I think of it as putting back together, of remembering the body, right? Of remembering how it is that I exist in the world. So it's a piecing together of myself that is part of what in my mind I consider the great scattering, which was slavery and the sale of us and being torn apart, not being able to constitute family. So I think, in terms of my particular African-American identity, I'm always in search for something sort of epigenetically, something that has been misplaced, and I'm always seeking to restore it. And I think that has to do with the way in which we're underrepresented and the way in which our history hasn't been taught, but yet we're central to the American experience. So to be both central, but without a formalized history for, decades, leaves you in this place. And I think Vicki and I have talked about this a lot, and you can say more, Vicki, where you're on a search constantly for the self, for the origin, for the women that we've lost who have made it possible for us to be here. Zora being emblematic of that, right? The woman that we know, but for every Zora are the hundreds of women who made our presence possible that we didn't know. And that history so far, although that's changing incrementally, feels we're not necessarily worthy of that documentation.
Yep.
Right. In some ways, I want the Zora and Me books to kind of be like a set of grandparents to its readers. I was raised by my grandparents, and my grandfather was a really prolific storyteller, and he was born in 1917. So for me, my earliest memories kind of start when he was able to articulate his to me. Mm-hmm. So I have ideas about, the rag man and the manure in the street and, clanking pots and horses and all this kind of business that was familiar to my grandfather. And I have lived with that being my sense of who I am because I was lucky enough to have someone share it with me. You know, I teach college. Many of my students who are 17 and 18 years old, they don't have grandparents that have told them about what it was like in the 50s or 60s. You know, they feel often very much at a remove from not only our past as a country, but just their past as a family. And I think part of what we have tried to do in these books is, you know, kind of make Zora Neale Hurston's family and upbringing and origins try to be a stand-in for a kind of idealized, though often troubling, you know, African-American experience, you know, to try to give people that memory that may have not come to them through their own familial lines.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And, you know, I just wanted educators to know that the Zora and Me books really, they're just amazing books to read, but for all of the reasons that you are sharing right now, ever so more important for them to be accessible to kids and to classrooms, to understand that the work of remembering involves, you know, learning about the mistakes of the past and how they impact us today, being aware not only of past conditions, but also being aware of one's own mind for ways that racist ideas can seep in. And your novels really help readers to learn about history and consider the implications of racism in the past, but also today. So for example, you know, the mob violence of the past in Greenwood, in Eatonville, manifests today in our lives when we take a look at police brutality and the insurrection, for example. And so, you know, I want educators to understand that they can help readers, students to learn about all of this through reading and through remembering. And so one of the people you clearly researched and read a lot about, we've been talking about, is Zora Neale Hurston. What inspired you to write a fictionalization trilogy of the early years of this literary giant genius? How did you both come together to author Zora and Me? And did you always have this series in mind? I'm just fascinated by that. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, Tanya, you have to start because this was your idea.
I was actually, I was pregnant with my daughter and I was thinking of the book I loved and what I would want to share with her as a reader. And I was thinking about the sort of dearth of books about young Black characters who also existed in nature and who had an upbringing that was similar to mine, which was not particularly urban. And so I was thinking about Zora and Eatonville, and I called Vicki up and I said, what if we made Zora Neale Hurston a kind of young girl detective? Because, you know, an anthropologist is like a cultural detective, and that's what she was. And so then, you know, Vicki came over and she's like, okay. And she graciously agreed. And then we set out on this journey. Vicki, then what happened?
Then, well, it was lasagna. You got me to your house. You said, I made lasagna. I was like, you made lasagna? Girl, I'll be there. You made lasagna. So I was just really excited and fascinated by Tanya's idea and just thinking of Zora in this way, having been familiar with her work, but not having read a lot of it. And I just was really just taken by her prose style, to be honest with you. You know, just this kind of the mythic quality of the stories she tells and the sentences she writes, but yet they're so focused on people and an experience at a certain time in a certain place. So I thought, wow, this is amazing. We can write these books as a kind of an ode to this amazing Black woman genius that helped us exist. Heck yes, let's do it.
Yeah. And I think also what was so important for both of us as we embarked on this, that we were going to tell a story about young Black life that didn't misrepresent the threat of white supremacy, but that also didn't position us at any point as victims. At every point, Eatonville residents are charting their own destiny. We are full of agency as a people in Eatonville.
Yes, I love that so much. I love the whole story. And TR, you know, I'm thinking about how you have this daughter. I also have a daughter, and you're thinking to yourself, who do I want her to know about? And that started you on this journey, because as we've been saying, so much of the history about Black people is omitted when our children go to school. I didn't learn about Zora Neale Hurston until I went to college, and only because I took a Black women writers course, right? And so think about, if I didn't take that course, when would I have the opportunity to learn about this incredible person? What does Zora Neale Hurston mean to you? So you decided this was someone that you wanted to write about together, but I'm just wondering for you personally, what does she mean to you? And why is it important for young readers like your daughter at the time and other, you know, young readers reading this trilogy, or any young people anywhere who are not aware of the trilogy yet? Why is it important for young readers to meet Zora Neale Hurston, younger Zora Neale Hurston? Why is it important for that to happen now in their lives?
You can do what you want your way, and no one can stop you. And where that journey will take you may not be what you expect, but it will have been on your terms. And I think, you know, I think so many of us kind of give up, as Tanya was saying, give up our power, give up our autonomy. And so much of Zora's life as a writer and a scholar was really trying to figure out how to have that autonomy, how to have that power. And this is something that, you know, Tanya and I have talked a lot about. There has been much written about the end of Zora's life, you know, how sad it was that she died in obscurity. And when Tanya and I went to her last home, which is like a bungalow cottage, you know, my thought was, this was a woman who died writing. She died doing what she lived to do, which was her work on her terms, in her way. And I don't know how many of us can say that we do have a room of our own, a bungalow of our own, a garden of our own, can eat our ice cream and walk our dog and fish down the road. So
describe the bungalow that we saw and how it looked to us and how it looked to the other people on the tour.
Well, it was so strange, you know, so it's like this kind of 2.5 room bungalow. It has like a nice sized living room, kind of like a kitchenette. And then she had like a proper writing room, and there's sun all over. It's surrounded by like a nice plot of land. If you go out right outside the door, look down the street, you know, it's all sky. You know, the beach is, you know, like, I don't know, a 4 or 5 minute walk away, you know, so it's just sky and horizon and palm trees. And I think that we have this idea about money and success and recognition being what we all are working for, fighting for, what the point of it all is. And, you know, after visiting Zora's last home, I was left thinking, no, the point is to be able to do your thing how you want to, somewhere beautiful. I would like that bungalow in Florida right about now. But, you know, that's not the thread that we're often presented with about Zora's life. And for me, that's the most important thing, I think, to share with young readers, you know, especially since we live in a world that's constantly on, where people are constantly monitoring what other people are saying about them, thinking about them, whether or not they've been seen through all our, you know, our multitude of screens. And Zora wasn't about what other people thought. She was about what she thought about conveying her sense of reality to the world.
Yeah. And TR, what does Zora mean to you, and why is it important for you to have young readers know about her, so they don't have to wait till, like I did when I was an adult in college, maybe by chance getting to meet her?
I think that I didn't know it when I was little, but I was already a little feminist. And I think that Zora is, she has contradictory parts of herself, and, but at her core, she's a feminist precisely because of what Vicky said. She's living her life on her own terms at every point. She doesn't default into marriage as a salvation. In fact, she thinks that these men get in the way of her career and her writing. It's deeply compelling. And as a child, when you read her autobiography, she's full of hijinks and vigor and brilliance. And I love that she takes the outdoors and she makes it her own personal kingdom and presides over it. And, as a child who loved Caddy Woodlawn, which is a book I think people may no longer be familiar with, I love stories of girls who go out and best boys and, and climb trees and are completely beholden to their own will and their sense of pleasure. And that to me is Zora.
Beautiful. Tell us a little bit about the series. Tell us about the trilogy. What can readers expect in each one of these amazing books?
Well, the first novel is really a murder mystery with a monster twist. When I think of it to myself now, it's really a monster story. It's a story about monsters, human and otherwise. And volume 2, Tanya.
Oh, I was going to add, in volume 1 really sort of sets Zora in motion in Eatonville. It introduces Eatonville. It introduces the characters that Zora herself wrote about. Joe Clark, who runs the company store, who's also the mayor, and her family and all of her family members. And it really is about the tension between Zora's imagination and the lived reality of the town. And it centers on something that happened in Zora's life, which was that a headless body was found outside of Eatonville. And that we use that as something that would have sparked Zora's imagination to try to discover why that body was there. And in our novel, she, in their childlike way, they solve the murder, which of course touches on the white world. And in book 2, it returns to my deep and abiding interest in American slavery. And I have the young Zora, young Carrie, and young Teddy confront the legacy of slavery in Eatonville. So that, all Black children have to at some point lose their innocence in terms of our history and come to terms with the fact that we were enslaved in this country's history. And so when they realize that they actually still live with people who in Eatonville who knew slavery, it opens their eyes and allows them to think about what slavery might have been. And in that awakening, and due to an injury that someone in the town sustains, they actually solve an antebellum murder mystery. So the story is told in 2 parts, 1 part in slavery and 1 part in Eatonville. And those 2 stories sync up to tell the history of Eatonville.
Nice.
In the third novel, I was really thinking about 2 pieces of Zora Neale Hurston's actual life. And one of them was her father was the mayor of Eatonville. And I wanted to write the backstory of how he became the mayor. And the other thing that fascinated me, and I think fascinates many people who read Zora's anthropology, is the writing that she did on zombies. And there's a famous photograph that Zora took, I think in 1936, of this woman in Haiti who had died and been buried. But, I think nearly 20 years later, might have been like 17 or 18 years later, reappears, and her family confirms that it is her. And Zora goes to the hospital where this woman no longer talks, hardly opens her eyes, and she takes this picture of her. And I was really interested, fascinated, and wanted to write the backstory, not only of, Zora coming to know zombies, but kind of Zora coming to know photography, kind of Zora, the journalist, Zora kind of out on the story, documenting it. And those were kind of the two seeds, John Hurston actually being the mayor, and Zora with her camera taking this photograph of this woman who, in the parlance of the time, was believed to be a zombie. That kind of gave birth to this kind of zombie story election, democracy is on the line kind of conclusion to our trilogy.
Yeah, and I just have to say, readers will just be fascinated by these books. There's adventure, history, mystery, monsters, each one equally compelling and beautifully written. There's so much to love in this trilogy of books. And among all of the things to love is the strong Black girl characters that you give readers, Carrie and Zora. Can you tell us about how you develop these characters? I also want to share the covers of the books so that people can see the trilogy. And if you want to give us a little bit of a snapshot of how we interact with these characters across the trilogy, that would be great too. But definitely, while interested to know about Teddy too, but we live in a world where Black girls don't always get to show up as their full authentic selves.
At the very beginning of this process, Tanya and I went back and forth a little bit about how are we going to tell the story and what voice from whose perspective. And I tried a couple of different perspectives. We never tried to write this from the perspective of Zora herself. So I think, I tried like a boy that likes Zora. I tried someone else. And then I tried this best friend who is called Carrie, our narrator. And Carrie's voice stuck. And I think it stuck for a lot of reasons. I think, number one, this is something that is at the heart of our culture as Black women, having girlfriends, having a friend, having a girlfriend that you can rely on to be able to tell you what's going on when you're not so sure anymore. And it is actually the device in Zora's most famous novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God. Janie is telling her story to her friend Phoebe, right? So in our books, we kind of turn the tables a little bit, and it's Carrie, the best friend, who is telling Zora's story. Also, Zora Neale Hurston didn't really have like true to the end, ride or die, never, ghost you kind of friends. And I think part of what we wanted to do in these books is try to right that wrong as artists is by kind of giving Zora a ride or die friend in Carrie. And I think the last piece of that is that Tanya was really set on having a boy character. And I'm happy that you were, because he's a great character, and he's really handy in terms of, kind of turning the knobs of the plot here and there. He was a lot of fun, Teddy, to work with in that regard. So
yeah, I was really set on having having a boy who's a friend to them, who does not embody a kind of dismissive masculinity when it comes to girls. Teddy absolutely respects them both as as much as he would respect any boy on the playground. Yeah. And, I thought that was important. Also, Carrie just carries our love of Zora in herself and shows Zora on the page in the way that I think Vicki and I see her as readers.
Yeah. Listening to your development of these characters makes me think about the research on Black girls and adultification. that Black girls are perceived as in need of less nurturing, less protection, less support, less comfort than their white peers, right? And we know that this contributes to disproportionate disciplinary actions toward Black girls in schools. And the implications of this are that Black girls can be pushed out of education. So I want educators to really think deeply about what you've both offered about Carrie and Zora, because it's particularly critical to have books like yours in our classrooms and schools that present Black girl characters the ways you have, that can also help educators to see Black girls as they really are: smart, self-assured, curious, funny, who have fears, who are human, right? Who are real. How would you like to see educators using this trilogy in the classroom?
I think on the one hand, to help in terms of, our historical understanding of who Black people are and the place that Black women have in American letters. That would be my first. But second, to see Black girls as exactly what you're saying, as full of imagination and wit and whimsy, but also as vulnerable and capable of experiencing trauma and having feelings and sadness and complicated inner lives, the things that I think are always sort of immediately attributed to white girlhood, but that the culture has a much harder time seeing in Black girls, precisely, I think, because they don't, there's a way in which the culture has so maligned Black life, and it extends to Black childhood. So Black childhood doesn't always exist in the white imaginary. We're always already on a path to some form of criminalization, and that's how we get the school to prison pipeline. So, I mean, I think that narratives that humanize us, that hopefully allow educators to teach us in ways that affirm our humanity and that allow students to read about their own, if they're Black, or if they're white, to read about other Black children who are in equal possession of imagination and humanity with them.
Yeah.
I think that there's something that goes on with people in history that I think actually unfortunately mirrors how a lot of Black kids of color, feel at school. And they're made to feel that way, often by authority figures, white authority figures. I think people often will say, oh, that was back then. People were different. I don't know what they were doing. I wouldn't do that now. I'm on some other thing. That was those people in those times. And I think the power of writing historical fiction is to say, no, look, walk in the shoes of those characters. Be in their heads. They're like you. You're like them. There are no differences between your humanity and their humanity. So, a Black kid in a classroom that feels alienated, who feels put down, who feels dismissed, ignored, I think that people in authority, other students in the class, need to acknowledge, hey, you're like me, you're sitting right here. There's no difference really between us. It's just this kind of, this mental kind of intellectual divide, this divide that really is a lack of imagination, a lack of empathy. So I think writing historical fiction, writing about an actual historical person, writing about a Black community that's part of America's history, I hope that white kids are as interested in this piece of Americana as Black kids are.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So for all of these reasons and for all of these ways, educators, it's important for you to know that there's endless possibilities for how these books can be centered in classrooms. Of course, during independent reading for all kids. Think about the fact that students will already know what they're going to read next because we've got 3 and they'll be hooked after the first one for sure. They can take center stage in book clubs, in historical fiction units. They connect to biography studies, fiction writing units, because Zora shows readers over and over again how to tell a great story, that's for sure. So Victoria and TR, what's next for both of you? What can readers look forward to?
Well, Vicky's working on a mystery of her own.
Yeah, I grew up going to Florida over the summer, which really helped in writing these books. But I'm from New Jersey, and I would like to write about something that happened in New Jersey, so I'm interested in the still historical fiction, but set up north.
That's exciting. And will this be for elementary grade?
Oh, middle grade all the way.
Middle
grade, yeah. I feel like I have a home there, or at least the home is in my heart. And I also, the middle grade books that are classics are just so mind blowing in their perfection. If you think of, Roll Thunder, Hear My Cry, even Charlotte's Web, those are 2 very different examples of middle grade books, but the way that they're able to distill story, distill feeling. So I'm on that journey of trying to write something that is good in this genre.
I'm sure it'll be amazing. We look forward to that. Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
So in Zora and Me, readers connect with themes of friendship, family, and community, as they are gifted with the seeds that you both plant across this trilogy about the girl who would become the literary genius Zora Neale Hurston. You blend mystery, history, and folklore seamlessly into stories that reveal the power and possibilities of imagination without dismissing the harsh realities of race. And I want to ask you both, what does it mean to you to be a Black creator?
I think we have this heritage as African Americans. We have this legacy, but it's also an inheritance. And the amazing thing about being an African American woman writing in the African American tradition is that this is an inheritance that can't be tapped out. It can't run out. It's infinite. And its ability to teach and inspire, it's just, it doesn't run out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so. Tanya?
Okay. For me, I think it's being a Black creator allows me to sort of tap into our history as a people, and it allows me to feel connected to the past, while at the same time discovering facets of myself in relation to our experience as a people. And I think that, I think it's probably a little bit cliched. I think it's part therapy. And also it's a way for me to sort of think through the problems of the culture and the tensions of the culture that reside in my body. I found it really meaningful and somewhat cathartic to be able to give those contradictions sometimes expression through characters and on the page. I found that there is something very particular about being a Black creator, in that regardless of, I think sometimes how you want to be in the world, you do always feel a kind of responsibility to the race. Mm-hmm. It's something that I just think is so deeply seated in me that I can't move away from it. So I'm writing about myself, I'm writing from my experience, but I'm always writing for my people, and I'm always writing about us.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, thank you both so much. It's been a pleasure to be in conversation with you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. This has been a real treat. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was such a profound and timely conversation with which to end our first season of the Black Creator Series. As we mark the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre this month, and as the ability of educators to teach truthful history is being undermined across the country, it is imperative that books by Black creators live in every classroom. To teach complicated and painful truths, to highlight and celebrate the richness and importance of Black culture, and to serve as mirrors of and windows to Black joy. For a full listing and links to previous episodes and the accompanying podcast, please visit blackcreatorseries.candlewick.com and check the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project's Facebook page. We look forward to being back in the fall to continue these valuable conversations. Once we have the schedule finalized, we'll post it to blackcreatorseries.candlewick.com and share via social media. Thank you to all the educators who joined us each month, and to Sonja and everyone at Teachers College who made all of this possible, and to the Black creators who shared their time, creativity, wisdom, and stories with all of us. Many thanks, and enjoy a very well-deserved summer break.